Hi, everyone. Today our topic is teacher clarity. So let's start with a question. Do your students know what they are supposed to be learning? Or does learning just feel like a list of things to do? And what's the difference between those two things? If learning is just a list of things to do, then why do they need you? These are some of the things we'll be thinking about and wrestling with as we move through this module. So let's get started. The research shows us that the effect of teacher clarity is whopping huge in the positive direction. It's 0.75. That makes it well worth our time and attention because it's a real accelerator of student learning, and it's not something we can really afford to ignore. Let's start with a thought experiment. Let's say that you are a fourth grader, and for the past couple of days, you've been learning about bats. You've seen videos, you've read texts, you've just had discussions with your peers, your teacher has read to you, you've done some writing. What is this all about? Is it about synthesizing across sources, becoming a bat expert, informational writing, or making the teacher smile because you're compliant? Likely fourth graders will think it's B or D, and I'm going to take those out of the mix right off the bat. D is silly. That's no reason to study anything. And B is just not rich enough for our classrooms. Becoming a BAT expert is something one can do on their own with all kinds of resources across the world. So it's got to be B or D. And let's take a look. If my learning intention is for you to learn about cross-text synthesis, I'll probably be looking to see if you can collect and merge information from various texts, if you can sort them into your own headings, if you can keep track of which author contributed which idea, and if you can notice whether a text contradicts another text and why that might be. On the other hand, if my learning intention for you is informational writing, I might be looking at some different things, such as whether you included examples, facts, details, etc., whether you gave credit to sources, which does seem the same as the last example, whether you can choose an organization to your writing, and whether you insert diagrams, charts, and headings and words and definition boxes and the like so that your reader can understand what you're trying to teach. These might sound rigorous. Honestly, I took them from fourth/fifth grade learning progression. So even though it sounds pretty rigorous, it is the kind of work that we do ask our middle grade students to do. What's the way that we can get them to do that sophisticated work is by letting them in on what the learning intentions are and letting them in on what the success criteria is. If I am just rolling along learning about bats and I don't know I'm supposed to be doing all these other things, I might have a rich and interesting experience, but I won't move forward in the same way that I would if my teacher was very clear about what the expectations were and what I was going to be graded on. These are the three most important principles from probably the whole distance learning playbook. What am I learning today? Why am I learning it? And how will I know that I learned it? If this sounds obvious, it is. It's nothing new. It has nothing to do with the pandemic or blended learning. It's just good old-fashioned teaching, but it's really at the heart of moving our students forward is if they understand these things. What's the goal? How do I get there? How do I know when I've made it? So I want to talk about a few ways that you can add clarity into your work. The first one is clarity of organization, and that means that the work that you ask students to do, perhaps on their home days or really anytime, does align to the learning intentions that you set forward, and that is clear and open and expressed to students as well as families. The second is clarity of explanation. And this means that the communication that you send and the way you explain the tasks and the learning intentions is relevant, accurate, and accessible. Third, examples and guided practice. You should be doing big, important work, even if we're in blended learning. Big, important work is really helpful because it's big and it's important. But when we're doing big, important work, it does take practice to get good at it and to master it and get to a point of proficiency. So when we first do informational writing, it might be pretty terrible. Second time through, it's a little bit maybe less terrible. third time, starting to get to kind of an okay place. You see where I'm going with that. Big important learning goes that way, and we want kids to do a lot of practice. So this is a way to add clarity to the work. You're writing about bats today, but you're writing about a topic of your choice at home, and then we'll get back and do our third iteration, when you're back next week, something like that. Learning progressions are one of the best ways to fast track this work. You can create your own learning progression, or sometimes you can find them based on the work that you do. This one is around how much writing we can expect from students at different grade levels. So it goes all the way from kindergarten, where writing maybe takes 10 minutes by the time you conceive of the idea, write the idea and finish it up, all the way to middle grades, where you're starting to write a couple pages at a time and you're trying out maybe different leads and different endings, all the way up through end of grade 8, where you've got a lot of ideas in your head and you're just purposely choosing one that's going to have the best payoff, etc. When students are in on these learning progressions and they know what the expectations are and how to move from one level to the next, that's where we really see acceleration of progress. Another way to add clarity is assessment of learning. If I understand this correctly from the Learning Playbook, this is about teachers paying close attention to student work and gleaning their teaching points and their interventions, and they're conferring from what the students are already doing. So if we pay some attention to teacher clarity, I think it will result in more accelerated learning for everyone and less frustration for everyone. When students don't know what the learning intentions or the success criteria are, it leads to a situation where we see all the time, perhaps as a 6th or 7th or 9th grade teacher, when you ask students, for example, what they know about informational writing, they're like, I don't know, I never did that. And we know that they did it, and we can't for the life of us figure out why they don't understand. And I think it's because in their memory, they're like, oh yeah, there's that time we read about bats. But we have to, if we do a better job at being explicit about why are we learning this about bats, because I want you to learn how to do these things, I think they'll have a better memory for it, and we'll be able to more easily build from year to year over what's really important. A final thing I just want to talk about briefly, because it's in Module 5, is Hattie's research also talks about a boredom effect, and it's very strong in the negative direction. It's a minus 0.47, meaning that once we lose our kids to boredom, they're not going to be learning. It's going to really interfere with their ability to learn. And we know this as adult learners too. I hesitate to admit this, but you might be sort of heavy-lidded right now, even listening to my video, so I'll try to make this short. There are 3 different ways to interrupt boredom effect that are recommended in the Distance Learning Playbook. The first one is by connecting curriculum to a personal association that students have. That could be a certain object, or maybe a memory that they have, or a shared experience. And this is one of many reasons why a read aloud is kind of a good idea. It's a shared experience. So could a project be, or a demonstration lesson, or a learning walk. A second way to counteract boredom is connecting curriculum to personal usefulness. That means student goals or student interests. If you know your students well, you can start to bend the curriculum to fit what they're interested in ways that will really help their achievement. And finally, personal identification. If students can connect the learning to some aspect of their identity, and we all have multiple aspects to our identities, that is a good way to make learning personal and meaningful. So I would suggest that you go to Module 5 in the Distance Learning Playbook. There's a lot of things to read there and take a look at. There's some nice resources that will help you in your conversations about teacher clarity. And thank you for watching the video.